Reading Swift Rivers by Cornelia Meigs. We're in our last chapter, Chapter 8. This will be broken into two sections, Chapter 8A and B. Chapter 8 is titled The Little Nut Tree. Stuart Hale and Chris were quarreling. In the room of their little lodging house near the shore of the river, they sat on opposite sides of the table and contended together in fierce argument. Money lay spread out on the board between them. "It was your idea," asserted Chris, all the obstinacy of his character behind his words. "It was your idea that it would be a good venture to bring logs down to the market. Now that they are sold, this is your share." "It's not my share," returned Stuart with heat. "You find me in the worst trouble that my foolishness has ever brought me into. You bring me along with you, and you help me." His voice faltered, but recovered as he went courageously on. "You help me see a thing through for the first time in my life. And then you talk about money. Every penny that's there you have earned, and you know in your stubborn heart that it's true. And you know, besides that, you need it for your grandfather if he is to be safe and comfortable. And you need it for yourself if you ever are to get that learning that you want so much and say so little about." "And what do you need it for?" Chris stood his ground. "You know, you must begin to think what you are to do next. And whatever you decide, it can't be managed without a single penny. I know that," he concluded, "because before this I have scarcely ever had a single one of my own." Stuart sat uneasily silent, looking down upon the gold and the notes upon the table. "You are right in one thing," he began finally. I have been thinking for a long time about what I should do now. I could go back with you up the river and help you with another season of logging." He paused to reflect a little longer, while the delight which leaped into Chris Dahlberg's eyes at the suggestion brought a flush of color to his own face. "There haven't been many places where I was really wanted," he declared bitterly, "so it doesn't seem easy to turn away from you and Pierre Dumenil and that prince of a grandfather of yours. I feel how much I want to go along with the three of you. But, he hesitated long again. "I do believe, and Dumenil believes too, that the right way is for me to do something else. I have talked with him a great deal in this time we have been waiting for you." With no effort at recollection, he repeated to Chris the very words of Dumenil's advice, forceful words which neither boy was ever to forget. "Stuart, I think you were fashioned by le bon Dieu to build things and look for things and discover things. But a man cannot properly go about that without a little learning. I know that is true, because there have been 1,000 things that I would have done, except for the one difficulty that made them all impossible. A man who is the son of a wandering French trapper and a Chippewa woman, who has never seen the inside of a schoolhouse, such as he must see 100 doors closed to him, because of what he does not know. We go up every day," Stuart went on, "to that house where the French sisters are nursing Langford and getting him well again, and while I wait for Pierre to finish talking to him, I go over what he has said to me. He is right. I must have more learning if I am to know how mines are to be dug, or roads built over mountains. I've thought of it before," he confessed frankly, "but it meant such long, hard work to study all that I needed to know, and I did not think I could hold to it as far as the end. But now," he said, looked across at Chris with a new light in his eyes, "now I verily believe that I can. Without you and Pierre Dumenil, I would never have come to have enough confidence in myself even to try." Chris went back in memory over the months of their acquaintance and could see what Pierre Dumenil's quick eye had discerned almost immediately. Stuart was indeed a builder, a discoverer, bold and resourceful, and if he could only achieve it again, possessed of staying power enough to see a thing to success. "I believe," declared Chris seriously, feeling that he was offering his friend the highest tribute which words could express, "I believe that you could be good at mining and building, as good as Pierre Dumenil is at being a pilot." Stuart's decision was now definitely made, with the result that the violent difference over sharing the money came to an end. He was to return to Pennsylvania, to his own people, and was to set himself at studying again, this time with direct purpose. It was plain that he could not make the homeward journey without money, so that he consented finally to receive as his portion an amount barely sufficient to carry him home. It was necessary, so the practical Chris pointed out, that he and Pharaoh should eat as they traveled. Stuart was already pondering the details of the journey. It would be quicker to take the horse on board a steamer if I can find one going up the Ohio, and I think there's no time to be lost. It was his intention, if he did take a boat, to work his way. Therefore, the amount of money which he needed was ridiculously small. Chris was still determined that his share should be greater. In the end, another compromise was made. You know, Stuart reminded Chris, what John Rollins said about the man up by the Goosewing River who bought Pharaoh from me, and how it was he who had lost what he paid for the horse? I wanted to buy the horse from Rollins, but instead, will you take the money to August Viborg? That was the name of the man that I sold him to. I can tell you just how to find him. Then I can know that Pharaoh really belongs to me again, and he and I set out for home. The two boys got up abruptly and went about some small business, each of his own, as though it were dangerously pressing. If they had to part, it was not to be at once, and there was no need of talking too much of it until the day should come. When Chris had first come to shore with the raft and found Pierre Juvenal waiting for him, he had not had the least idea what a person should do who brings timbers from the far hill country to the waiting market. But this was a matter with which Pierre was as familiar as with the moods and currents of the Mississippi. He had brought Chris, next day, into the counting room of that St. Louis merchant who owned the sawmill. There was a company gathered there, 5 or 6 gentlemen, very impressive with their tall beaver hats, their high stocks and strapped trousers. They seemed to Chris, for the first moment, to be as appalling and as numerous as though there were a score of them. He saw upon the table a thin section of walnut, a piece he recognized, sawed from one of his smaller hardwood logs. That, at least, looked familiar. His eyes followed it when one of the strangers took it up. To this man he was introduced by Pierre and learned that he was Monsieur Gervais from New Orleans, a builder of ships. Chris recollected how Shreve MacLeod had spoken of this excitable acquaintance. Would he truly weep upon the boy's shoulder, as the Scotchman had foretold? In spite of his shyness, Chris chuckled in remembrance. The Frenchman smiled delightedly in response, and they were acquainted. Monsieur Gervais did not weep, but there was excitement in his fine eyes as he examined the beautiful pattern of wood. Northern walnut, he said, grown slowly, without too much water and without too much heat. I have seen that noble tree of yours down by the river, my dear sir, and I judge it to have had a century at least of splendid life. A year of seasoning would not be too much for it. The fairy tales tell of great things done in a year and a day. We who have to do with wood think it better, if it is 100 years and one. He looked about at the company, all of them interested and some of them amused at his flaming eagerness. He went on, still addressing himself chiefly to Chris. We have a new ship upon our ways down beside the Gulf, the Golden Age. For her figurehead, I have long planned there should be an embodiment of Father Time with great wings, with his hourglass and long scythe. He began to speak more quickly as his excitement and enthusiasm rose. I go to my best carver, a man with a true eye and a cunning hand, and tell him what I must have. Let the wings sweep so, I say. His illustrating gesture upset a beaver hat on the table and sent it rolling across the floor. But the slight mishap brought never a pause in the fluency of his speech. And let the scythe be poised exactly for its proper swing. I will indeed make you just what you ask for, he assures me. But where do you find me a block of wood great enough for such an image? Can I make wings and scythe and mighty figure out of these poor things which the shipyard offers? You should not insult me, Monsieur Gervais, by suggesting that I carve it in sections so noble a work as that which you desire. Wings made up in pieces, sir. Do you ask a master craftsman to set his hand to such a thing? Bring me as noble a block as the idea is noble, a block of perfect hardness and perfect grain. Then shall your Father Time breast the seas for generations to come. I look everywhere, Monsieur Gervais hastened on to tell them. I seek here and I seek there, and all the places where I buy my lumber. But what do they offer me? The perfect logs are small. The big ones are coarse. I am in despair. I know not what to do. And then he flung up his hands as he came to the dramatic climax. Then your excellent friend, Monsieur Pierre Dumenil, takes me down to the waterside and shows me, lying amongst the ripples, that of which I have only dared to dream. Chris, watching with fascinated eyes every rapid expression which swept over the shipbuilder's mobile face, was not sure but that the promised tears were actually not far away. Bargains for other parcels of his lumber were made in a more prosaic manner. Each of the gentlemen there had his own needs, had looked over what Chris had brought, and found it good. One man was plainly Spanish. Another spoke with a leisurely and liquid flow of words which Chris afterward learned to recognize as Virginian. None of them haggled. All of them were definite and prompt. Chris forgot to be abashed in their unfamiliar presence. He and they were there upon common ground, all of them interested in timber and what could be made from it. A long, lean boy from the hill country, sunburned and a little hollow under the cheekbones, was not so greatly out of his place in that carefully dressed gathering. He had that to give which they were glad to receive, and they all met upon equal footing. But he did feel a little days afterward, when all were gone except the pleasant-faced proprietor of the counting room and Pierre Dumenil. A clerk was called in with a great bag of money, and he, in a dry, matter-of-fact manner, magically transformed the bills of exchange into a heap of banknotes and heavy gold pieces. Chris Dahlberg's first effort was to settle with Pierre Dumenil for the making of the transporting of his portion of the raft. In that undertaking, he made no progress at all. With McLeod, yes, there may be some small matters to arrange when you pass that way again, Pierre said to him. But with me, after you have toiled so well under my command, after you have served my dearest friend, do you think there can be any talk of stuff like this? His scornful gesture dismissed the money as something of not the slightest account. There remained the 2 letters to be attended to, that surprising missive entrusted to Chris for the mails by Mr. Barton Howland, and the other which Chris was to present himself when he should find out where a certain Mr. David Payne might reside. From some talk dropped in the counting room, he had learned that Mr. Payne was a minister. He and Stewart went together to the tavern by the waterside, where was collected the mail to be carried up the Ohio by the next steamboat. The clerk received his letter, frankly read the address, and then looked up to stare with equally frank amazement at this tall lad in shabby raftsman's clothes, who was dispatching a red-sealed epistle addressed to Mr. Andrew Jackson, President of the United States. Long after, an answer to that missive sought and found Chris in his far corner of the mountain country. It offered the thanks and appreciation of the president, and declared that the suggestion of Mr. Jackson's friend, Barton Howland, had been very timely. Certain geographical vagueness in high places might indeed have set the headwaters of the Goosewing River outside the boundaries of the Louisiana Purchase when its limits were finally determined. A veritable treasure house of grain, iron, and lumber was unlocked for the people of the United States on that day when Chris and Stewart set sail southward from the mouth of the Goosewing. But of all this, Chris could know nothing now as he went on to ask where he should look for Mr. David Payne. He has a church up yonder a few squares beyond the cathedral, the boys were told. Chris waited until the next day, which was Sunday, to set out to find the little Protestant church, small and inconspicuous at that date amid a French Catholic community. Stewart and Pierre walked part of the distance with him, but Stewart was going to see Joe Langford on that sunny morning, and Pierre Dumenil was to join the throng moving up to the doors of the great cathedral. That good friend, who is making my own friend well, must not go unthanked, Pierre declared. Chris went forward almost solitary now, in the streets where the Sunday peace reigned everywhere. This must indeed be the church of Mr. David Payne, a low building with its door almost upon the street. Chris had never been in any other than the little Lutheran church which the settlers in the Goosewing Valley had built, small and square and whitewashed, with the short, solid spire of the rural churches in the old country. The service here had begun, and since there was no one to bear him company in being a few minutes late, Chris went in alone through the open door and sat down in the nearest narrow pew. The hymn was just ending, and a man with bent shoulders and a rugged, striking profile had got up to read from the great Bible. The singing by the scanty choir had sounded rather meager, but never before had Chris heard such music as that of the great voice which went rolling through the room. The boy was so unused to any church custom but his own that he was obliged to pay somewhat more attention to the times of getting up and sitting down during the service than to listening to the psalms and the long prayer. He felt that eyes might be watching this rudely dressed stranger and would criticize any awkward negligence on his part in following what the others did. It was with a sense of relief that he saw everyone settle down, finally, to listen to the sermon. He understood about sermons. Those of the good old pastor at home always made him feel peaceful and a little sleepy. An hour of quiet would be pleasant now. David Payne was more plainly visible as he came forward to preach. He was strongly built, not very tall, with the round shoulders of a scholar. His forehead was high. His eyebrows overshadowed deep-set, dark and burning eyes. As he began to speak, his glance ran rapidly from face to face, as though he were gathering them all together to listen to him. It was cool and shadowy in that unadorned room with its low windows, but windows, walls, even the people about him seemed to Chris to go far away, while the clear, brilliant light of all glorious things of the mind and spirit beat down upon him. He felt that the man before him was explaining one of the most difficult truths of all religious thinking, but that his winged words and soaring images made it infinitely clear. David Payne was a master of teaching as well as of preaching. Certain sentences, which seemed to thrust themselves bodily into his sermon, made reference to the school which he was hoping to found, a project evidently so dear to his heart that he could not speak for half an hour and keep quite free of it. For young spirits in a new country, he was saying, education was as essential as in the older communities. Let no one tell me, he declared, that the eager minds which dwell in this unhampered land are not hungry for learning.